It was the summer of 2019 when Clara Jennings, a 32-year-old single mother, decided to escape the noise of her hectic city life. Clara lived in Fort Lauderdale with her 6-year-old son, Ethan, and was known among friends for her fierce independence. She often shared on social media how much she loved nature, posting snapshots of trails, sunsets, and the quiet beauty of the Everglades. That weekend, she told her sister she was going for a short solo trip into the swampy wilderness, promising to be back by Sunday evening. On Saturday morning, Clara drove her silver SUV to a remote trailhead at the edge of the Everglades. The spot wasn't popular with tourists, more known among experienced hikers and locals familiar with its winding, waterlogged paths. Surveillance cameras later confirmed she arrived around 8:42 a.m., parking her vehicle neatly near the ranger station. Inside the car, investigators would later find her cell phone, wallet, and even her car keys resting on the dashboard, as though she had never planned to go very far. Witnesses recalled seeing Clara carrying a small backpack, a water bottle, and a camera strapped around her neck. She was dressed lightly for the Florida heat: shorts, a tank top, and hiking boots that seemed far too clean for what awaited in the swamps. A retired couple who passed by that morning claimed they saw her smiling, snapping photos of the landscape, before walking alone into the trail. Nobody saw her return. Hours passed, then a full day, and by Sunday night Clara still hadn't come home. Her sister grew anxious when Clara failed to respond to texts and calls, something she never ignored when it came to Ethan. By Monday morning, with still no word, her family filed a missing person report. Ethan was left in the care of relatives, while law enforcement began piecing together Clara's last known movements. When police reached the trailhead, they found her SUV, exactly as it had been left, locked, untouched. The windows glinted in the sunlight, as if mocking the searchers, who desperately wanted to find answers. Her personal belongings sat inside, eerily undisturbed, giving investigators the sense that Clara had stepped out for just a moment but somehow never returned. There were no footprints, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle. It was as if the swamp had simply opened its mouth and swallowed her whole. The moment Clara was officially reported missing, the Broward County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate search operation. At first, investigators believed it would be a routine rescue. Hikers occasionally lost their way in the Everglades, only to be found hours or days later, dehydrated, but alive. Clara was young, fit, and resourceful. Surely, they thought, she would emerge on her own. But as the first 24 hours stretched into 48, that sense of optimism began to fade. By Tuesday morning, a full-scale search was underway. Helicopters scanned the swamp from above, their floodlights cutting through the thick canopy of cypress trees. Airboats sped across the dark water, engines roaring as search crews combed every channel and marsh. Trained dogs were brought in, their handlers guiding them along the trail Clara was last seen walking. The dogs barked at patches of grass and water, but none could hold a consistent scent. It was as if her trail had vanished within yards of the parking lot. Volunteers from surrounding communities soon joined the effort. Dozens of strangers, moved by the story of a single mother who never came home, trudged through knee-deep water, braving swarms of mosquitoes and the constant threat of alligators lurking nearby. Searchers carried sticks to probe the ground ahead, fearful of stepping on snakes hidden beneath the murky surface. Every rustle of grass, every splash in the water sent chills up their spines. Still, the vast wilderness yielded nothing. No clothing, no backpack, no trace of Clara at all. Days turned into weeks, and the search radius expanded further and further from the trailhead. The Everglades, with its endless web of waterways and sawgrass prairies, proved almost impossible to navigate. Even seasoned rangers admitted that it was a place where people could disappear forever. Locals whispered that the swamp keeps what it wants, a phrase that weighed heavily on Clara's family as hope slipped further away. Despite the overwhelming manpower, the search felt like chasing shadows in a land that swallowed evidence whole. As the investigation dragged on, frustration mounted among Clara's loved ones. Her sister begged authorities not to give up, pointing out that Clara was strong and determined, and would have fought to survive. But behind closed doors, officers began to prepare for the worst. The silence of the swamp was deafening, and the search teams knew a haunting truth. In the Everglades, the line between the living and the lost was perilously thin. As the official search dragged on with no results, strange rumors began spreading among the people who lived near the Everglades. Some swore they had seen flickering lights deep within the swamp on nights following Clara's disappearance, lights that didn't move like flashlights, but swayed unnaturally, as though carried by unseen hands. Others claimed to hear voices echoing through the marsh after midnight, voices calling names that no one recognized, though investigators dismissed these stories as the imagination of locals. The tales continued to grow, feeding the sense that Clara's case was far from ordinary. Hunters and fishermen who frequented the Everglades began telling unsettling stories of their own. Several reported seeing giant Burmese pythons near the very trail Clara had entered. The snakes, invasive to Florida, had been multiplying rapidly in the region, some growing over 15 feet long. One hunter even told police he had spotted a python that seemed unusually swollen, slithering through the sawgrass not far from where Clara's car had been parked. But by the time wildlife officers followed up, the snake had vanished without a trace. Clara's family couldn't ignore the stories. Her sister remembered how Clara had posted a week before her disappearance about her fear of the massive snakes, writing, "I swear, one day the Everglades will be nothing but swamp and monsters." At the time, it seemed like a joke. Now, it felt chillingly prophetic. Every rumor about an oversized python only deepened the family's dread that Clara had stumbled upon something inhumanly large and had no chance of escaping. But there were other whispers, ones that were far darker. A group of locals told reporters that Clara's disappearance wasn't about wildlife at all. They insisted the swamp was home to strange gatherings at night, rituals held in places outsiders never dared to go. According to them, the lights people had seen were not rescue teams or hikers but part of something secret, something meant to stay hidden. They warned investigators not to ask too many questions, claiming that the Everglades didn't just hide predators of the natural kind. These rumors were never confirmed. But they clung to Clara's story like a shadow. Each new whisper added another layer of fear, another unanswered question. Was Clara the victim of a wild creature, dragged into the water before she could scream? Or had she stumbled onto something she was never meant to see? The Everglades had a way of swallowing both evidence and truth, leaving only stories behind, and Clara's case was becoming one of its darkest legends. Nearly a year after Clara's disappearance, wildlife officers were patrolling a remote section of the Everglades as part of their ongoing battle against invasive Burmese pythons. These snakes had become notorious for their size and appetite, capable of devouring deer, alligators, and anything unfortunate enough to cross their path. On a humid morning in June, a team of officers spotted movement in the tall grass ahead. At first, they assumed it was another alligator slipping back into the water. But when the reeds shifted and a massive body uncoiled, they realized they were staring at one of the largest pythons they had ever seen. The snake was at least 18 feet long, its scales glistening under the Florida sun. What drew their attention, however, wasn't just its immense size, it was the unnatural bulge that distended its midsection. The snake moved sluggishly, as though weighed down by something far larger than its body should contain. Experienced officers knew what that meant. The python had recently consumed something massive. Still, there was something strange about this bulge. It wasn't the smooth, rounded shape of an animal. It was uneven, awkward, almost human-like. Approaching the python was no easy task. The officers circled it cautiously, using long poles to keep it from striking. The snake hissed, coils tightening and releasing, as if guarding whatever lay inside its belly. After a tense struggle, they managed to pin the creature and subdue it with sheer manpower. Even as they lifted it onto the transport truck, the bulge shifted unnervingly, like a grotesque reminder of what secrets the reptile carried. The python was taken to a wildlife facility for examination. Officials expected to find a deer or perhaps a wild hog, but whispers began spreading almost immediately among the staff. Some said the bulge looked too narrow to be an animal with 4 legs. Others swore they could make out the faint outline of a shoulder beneath the snake's stretched skin. Rumors spread quickly, and soon word reached investigators still haunted by the cold case of Clara Jennings. When the call came in that a python with a suspiciously human-shaped bulge had been captured near the same trail where Clara vanished, detectives rushed to the facility. They had spent nearly a year with no leads, no answers, and no closure for Clara's family. Now, for the first time, they faced a lead that was horrifying, unthinkable, and potentially the key to unraveling the mystery that had haunted the Everglades since the day Clara stepped into the swamp and never returned. At the wildlife facility, a team of biologists and investigators prepared to examine the massive python. Its body writhed slowly inside a reinforced enclosure, muscles shifting like coils of rope under its patterned skin. The bulge at its center was grotesque, stretching the snake's body wider than seemed natural. For hours, the team debated their next step. Normally, a python's stomach contents were studied after euthanization, but this case felt different, heavier, darker. The investigators knew that whatever was inside could hold answers to a year-old mystery, answers they weren't ready to face. When the snake was finally sedated, the room fell silent. A veterinary team moved in, performing scans and X-rays over the bulging midsection. The images on the screen left the room unsettled. Inside the snake's body, they could make out fragmented skeletal remains. The bones appeared delicate yet unmistakably human. Alongside them, faint outlines of what looked like fabric showed up in the scan clothing that hadn't fully broken down in the snake's stomach acids. The silence in the room was broken only by the beeping of the machines, each scan confirming the same dreadful truth. Carefully, the team began the grim process of removing the remains. What emerged wasn't just bone but chilling evidence that seemed to belong to one person. A tattered piece of fabric was pulled out first, what looked like the remnants of a tank top, stained and shredded. Wrapped within the remains was a small, twisted bracelet made of silver beads. Investigators froze. Clara Jennings' sister had described that exact bracelet during her interviews. It was Clara's favorite piece. One she never left home without. The identification was instant and devastating. But as the process continued, investigators realized something was wrong. The remains did not form a complete skeleton. Entire sections, ribs, part of the skull, and several major bones were missing. What they had recovered was incomplete, as though Clara's body had been tampered with before the python swallowed it. This chilling thought unsettled the team. Could the snake have scavenged an already dismembered body? Or had someone deliberately placed the remains inside the reptile to conceal them? Neither answer brought comfort. The most disturbing detail came last. When examining the python itself, experts noticed unusual scars along its underside. Faint, but undeniable. The marks looked surgical, as if the snake had been cut open and then stitched back together. The implication was horrifying. Someone might have deliberately used this python as a grotesque hiding place. If true, it meant Clara's death wasn't an accident of nature, it was part of something far darker, and whoever was responsible was still out there. The revelation of Clara's remains inside the python sent shockwaves through both the investigation and the community. At first, authorities tried to present it as a tragic accident, another case of Florida's invasive predators claiming a human life. But as more details of the discovery leaked, that explanation began to crumble. The missing bones, the unnatural stitching, and the eerie precision of the cuts were not details that could be dismissed. They raised questions far darker than the original tragedy. If Clara had been attacked, why didn't her remains tell the full story? And if she hadn't, then who had orchestrated such a horrific cover-up? Detectives who had worked Clara's case from the beginning admitted in hushed tones that the python discovery felt staged. Some theorized she may have died at the hands of someone else, and her body was deliberately concealed in the snake to erase evidence. But how and why? The sheer logistics of cutting open an 18-foot python, placing human remains inside, and then releasing it back into the swamp without drawing attention seemed nearly impossible. Yet the surgical scars on the reptile's belly told their own undeniable story. Someone had done it. Theories flooded in from every corner. Locals clung to the idea of cult activity, pointing again to the mysterious lights reported in the swamp, and whispered tales of secret gatherings in the dead of night. Online forums speculated about wildlife smugglers, suggesting Clara may have stumbled across something illegal, poaching, trafficking, or experimental breeding, and paid the ultimate price. Each theory felt more sinister than the last, but none could explain the missing pieces of her skeleton. None could answer why the python had been used like a container. As if Clara's remains were meant to be found, but not all of them. Clara's family, broken by grief, demanded answers. Her sister questioned investigators relentlessly, asking why the official narrative seemed so hesitant to explore foul play. Why push the tragic python attack explanation when the evidence pointed to something much darker? Why ignore the scars on the snake's body or the fact that Clara's belongings had been left untouched in her car? For every answer authorities tried to provide, new questions emerged, questions that twisted the case into a puzzle with pieces deliberately missing. And perhaps most chilling of all was the timeline. The python was captured nearly a year after Clara disappeared. If the remains inside were truly hers, how had the snake's body preserved them for so long without complete digestion? Some experts whispered that the remains had not been inside the snake the entire year that they had been placed there much later. If that was true, it meant someone had been holding on to Clara's body all that time, waiting, planning, and finally choosing the most grotesque way imaginable to reveal part of the truth while hiding the rest. Officially, the case of Clara Jennings remains classified as an unresolved disappearance. But those closest to the investigation know it is far from ordinary. The python was marked as the probable cause in her death. Yet even in the official reports, careful language was used, phrases like likely involvement and possible ingestion, as if no one wanted to take responsibility for declaring the truth. Behind the scenes, investigators argued fiercely about what had really happened. Some clung to the python theory, others whispered of something far darker lurking in the swamp, and none could agree on how Clara's story fit together. The scars on the python's body remained the most disturbing clue. Independent experts who reviewed the photographs noted that the stitching was crude but deliberate, not the result of an injury or natural accident. Someone had opened that snake and sewn it shut again. But who would do such a thing, and more importantly, why? Was it meant to frighten, to mislead, or to cover up a crime too terrible to reveal? The unsettling idea that a human hand had manipulated both Clara's remains and the python itself turned the swamp into something far more sinister than a wilderness of predators. Locals only fueled the growing unease. Residents near the Everglades spoke in hushed voices about how Clara's disappearance was just one of many strange vanishings that had never been solved. Some pointed to old police files, cases of missing hunters, hikers, and travelers whose fates were never determined. Others claimed to have seen figures carrying lanterns deep in the swamp at night, long after the search for Clara had ended. To them, the python was not the predator, was a distraction from something much more human, something that used the swamp's vastness as its perfect hiding place. For Clara's family, the pain of not knowing has never healed. Each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, they gather near the trailhead where her car was found, placing flowers at the edge of the swamp. Her son, now old enough to ask questions, wants to know what happened to his mother, but no one can give him an answer. All they can offer is the chilling truth. Part of Clara was found, but the rest of her story, like the missing pieces of her skeleton, remains hidden in the shadows of the Everglades. Even today, hikers who wander too far into that part of the swamp report an oppressive silence, as if the land itself remembers what happened. Some claim to hear splashes in the water when no animals are near. Others speak of a strange smell that drifts through the trees, sharp and metallic, as if the swamp still carries a trace of blood. To the casual visitor, the Everglades is a place of beauty, but to those who know the story of Clara Jennings, it is a place where nature and nightmare blur together, and where the truth still waits unseen, unanswered, and perhaps never meant to be found. And so, the mystery of Clara Jennings lingers, half hidden in the shadows of the Everglades, half buried in the stomach of a python that should never have been part of her story. Was she truly a victim of nature's most ruthless predator, or of something far more calculated, something that still walks free among us? 1 year later, no answers have come, only questions that grow darker with time. The swamp keeps its secrets, and maybe it always will. But if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of the Everglades trail where Clara parked her car, listen closely. In the silence of the reeds and the stillness of the water, you may feel it too, that unsettling sense that the swamp is still watching and waiting.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.